I'd always liked the old grocery store down the street. It had a certain charm that the larger chains lacked: creaky wooden floors, dusty shelves, and the comforting smell of aged cardboard. But recently, things had started to feel different. Strange, unsettling things were happening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. It all began about a month ago. I was browsing the cereal aisle when I noticed a box of Cheerios floating an inch above the shelf before gently settling back down. I thought it was a trick of my tired eyes. But then the lights flickered, and a shiver ran down my spine. I shrugged it off, but the sensation lingered. A week later, as I picked up some pasta, I felt a sudden chill. It was as if an icy breath had brushed past me. I glanced around and noticed that my breath was visible, even though it was a warm day outside. I told the cashier about it as I was checking out. "Strange things happening in here lately," I said, trying to sound casual. She gave me a thin smile. "Just the old building settling. You get used to it." But I wasn't so sure. Things continued to escalate. I'd be standing in one aisle, and when I turned around, the shelves would be inexplicably rearranged. One day, the entire dairy section was in disarray, milk cartons strewn about and butter missing from its usual spot. One evening, after work, I decided to do my shopping later than usual. The store was almost empty, save for a few scattered shoppers. I turned down the bread aisle and saw it, a loaf of sourdough sitting upright on a shelf, seemingly balancing on its own. My heart raced as I approached it, but as soon as I reached out, it fell over, landing with a thud. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and glanced around. A cold spot hovered around the bread aisle, the temperature noticeably lower than in the rest of the store. I walked briskly to the checkout, trying to ignore the sense of being watched. As I was leaving, I noticed an elderly man standing by the entrance, his face gaunt and pale. He stared intently at the shelves, mumbling to himself. "Do you see them? They're angry," he said as I approached. I hesitated. "See what? What's wrong?" He shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "They don't want us here. They want us to leave." I felt a chill. "Who's they?" Before he could answer, he turned and shuffled out the door, leaving me with an unsettling feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the store. I decided I needed to investigate further. The following weekend, I returned to the store with a plan. I'd stay hidden and observe, hoping to find some explanation for the eerie occurrences. I waited until closing time, then slipped into a dark corner near the back office, hoping to remain unseen. The store's closing procedures were typical: lights dimmed, music turned off, and the occasional clang of a shopping cart. I watched as the staff finished their duties and left, locking up behind them. I waited, my heart pounding, as the store plunged into silence. Around midnight, I noticed something odd: the temperature dropped rapidly. I could see my breath as I moved through the aisles. The faintest glow appeared on the edges of the shelves, and the atmosphere became thick with an almost tangible presence. The fog rolled in again, as if conjured by some unseen hand. I saw objects moving on their own, cans shifting, boxes sliding off shelves, and the eerie feeling of being watched intensified. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. Suddenly, the lights flickered wildly, and a deep, guttural growl filled the air. I spun around, searching for the source. The sound came from the back office. Gathering my courage, I approached the office door, which was slightly ajar. Peering inside, I saw a flickering light from a desk lamp, illuminating dusty files and old photographs. On the wall was a large, old portrait of a stern-looking man. His eyes seemed to follow me, a detail that made my skin crawl. Next to the portrait was an old ledger book with yellowed pages. I picked it up and flipped through it. The ledger detailed transactions from decades ago, but towards the end, the entries became erratic, almost frantic. There were references to unseen forces and payments for peace. My stomach churned as I read the final note, scrawled in a shaky hand: they demand a price. The store must appease them. The store's eerie ambience grew more intense. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and whispers filled the air. I heard a voice, clear and desperate, saying, "Help us. Release us." Panic surged through me. I needed to get out. I dropped the ledger and fled towards the exit, the air growing colder with each step. I could hear faint, mournful cries behind me, growing louder and more urgent. The fog seemed to press in, making it difficult to see. As I burst through the front door and into the night, I could hear the whispers fading, replaced by a deafening silence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I looked back at the store, its windows dark and empty, and felt a profound sense of relief mixed with fear. The next morning, I returned to the store, but it was as if nothing had happened. The shelves were neatly organized, and the staff seemed completely unaware of the previous night's events. I considered telling someone, but I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. I began to research the store's history. I learned that it had been established in the early 1900s by a man named Richard Blackwood. Local records revealed that Blackwood was rumored to have dabbed in occult practices and made dubious deals to ensure the store's success. It was said that he had vanished under mysterious circumstances, leaving the store to his heirs, who had since sold it off. Determined to uncover more, I sought out local historians and old-timers who might have known Blackwood. An elderly historian named Mr. Jenkins agreed to meet me at the local library. When I described the strange occurrences, his face grew serious. Richard Blackwood was a controversial figure, Mr. Jenkins said, adjusting his glasses. He was rumored to have made a pact with entities that were not of this world. He wanted to ensure the store's success at any cost. The stories say that he did something terrible to gain favor. What did he do? I asked. No one knows for sure, Jenkins said, lowering his voice. But the whispers say that he performed dark rituals to bind these entities to the store. The store's prosperity was his in exchange for his soul, and others. The revelation sent shivers down my spine. It seemed that the whispers and the eerie presence in the store were linked to Blackwood's dark bargain. The store was no ordinary place, it was a prison for malevolent forces, and the occurrences I'd witnessed were their attempts to break free. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided to confront the store's management. I spoke to the current owner, a man named Greg Thompson, and shared what I had learned. His initial reaction was one of disbelief, but as I described the eerie events and the ledger's notes, his face grew pale. I've heard stories, Greg admitted reluctantly. But I always thought they were just old legends. My grandfather never spoke of the store's past, but there were always strange things happening. Maybe it's time we did something about it. Together, we planned a strategy. We researched possible methods to break the entity's hold on the store and performed a thorough cleansing ritual with the help of experts in local folklore and spiritual practices. It took days of preparation and work, but we were determined to put an end to the store's dark legacy. The night of the ritual, the store was again shrouded in fog and darkness. The temperature dropped sharply as we began the incantations, and a low, rumbling growl filled the air. Shadows danced menacingly around us as we worked. At one point, a fierce cold wind swept through the store, extinguishing our candles and plunging us into darkness. We pressed on, reciting the protective words from the ledger and focusing on dispelling the dark forces. When the ritual was complete, a profound silence fell over the store. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the temperature returned to normal. Exhausted but relieved, we left the store, unsure of what would come next. Since then, the store has been quieter, the odd occurrences almost completely stopped. It seems that the entities that haunted it were finally appeased or banished. The store's charm has returned, though I can't forget the fear I experienced and the dark secret I uncovered. I still shop there occasionally, but I do so with a cautious respect. The store's history is a reminder of the boundaries that should never be crossed and the shadows that sometimes linger where we least expect them. The old grocery store on the corner had always been my go-to for late-night shopping. Its faded sign and creaky doors gave it a nostalgic charm that larger, modern stores just couldn't replicate. But over the past few months, the store had become more unsettling than charming. It started subtly. I'd be in the cereal aisle, and I'd notice that the boxes seemed to be arranged differently each time I came by. At first, I thought it was just my memory playing tricks on me. Maybe I was tired, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But then, the changes started to get weirder. One night, I was picking up some pasta when I felt an icy breeze brush past me. The store was sweltering outside, so the sudden chill was jarring. I looked around, but no one seemed to notice. The temperature remained normal for the rest of my shopping, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something being off. The next week, as I walked down the dairy aisle, I saw a carton of milk levitating about an inch above the shelf before gently landing back. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen. I mentioned it casually to Lisa, the cashier, as I was checking out. "You know, I saw something weird in the dairy aisle tonight." A carton of milk seemed to float. Lisa's expression didn't change much. She merely offered a half-hearted smile. "Old buildings can play tricks on you. Probably just a draft or something." But it wasn't just drafts. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. The lights in the store flickered randomly, and cold spots began appearing in different aisles. I'd walk through the produce section, and the air would turn frigid, my breath coming out in visible puffs. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting harder. One night, as I picked up some bread, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, but the aisle was empty. I could see the bread on the shelves shifting, like someone was moving them, though no one was there. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried to the checkout. "Did you notice anything strange tonight?" I asked Lisa, trying to sound nonchalant. She gave me a curious look. "Strange? Like what?" "I don't know, just odd things. Like cold spots and stuff moving on its own." Lisa's face went pale. "Oh. You're not the only one. Some of the other customers have mentioned things too." I thought it was just stress or fatigue. That was the first time I realized I wasn't alone in experiencing these disturbances. I began paying closer attention, trying to piece together what was happening. I started noticing patterns. The cold spots were always near the old, neglected sections of the store, the back office, the storage rooms, and a few forgotten aisles. Determined to find out more, I began my own investigation. I started with the store's history, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. I visited the local library and dug through old newspapers and records. It was then that I stumbled upon a series of articles about the store's original owner, Richard Blackwood. According to the articles, Blackwood had founded the store in the early 1900s. He was a well-known businessman with a reputation for being ruthless in his dealings. There were whispers of occult practices and dark rituals linked to his success. The final entry in the ledger from the store's early days mentioned something cryptic: the entity's hunger must be sated. Armed with this information, I decided to talk to some of the locals who had lived in the area for a long time. An elderly woman named Mrs. Hargrove, who had been a customer at the store for decades, agreed to meet with me. "I remember stories," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "People said Richard Blackwood was involved in dark things. They said he made a deal with some unseen forces to ensure the store's prosperity. The store was always successful, but people whispered about strange occurrences." "What kind of strange occurrences?" I asked. "Lights flickering, cold spots, things moving on their own," she replied. "The store was always a bit eerie, but people got used to it. When Blackwood disappeared, the stories faded, but it seems those forces never left. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. It seemed that the disturbances I'd been experiencing were connected to these dark forces that Blackwood had allegedly summoned. I decided to take a more direct approach and investigate the store further. One night, after closing hours, I snuck back into the store through a side door. The air was thick with an oppressive silence as I moved through the darkened aisles. I headed straight for the back office, the area where I had felt the coldest and most intense disturbances. The back office was cluttered with old files and dusty furniture. I spotted a large, framed portrait on the wall, a stern-looking man who I assumed was Richard Blackwood. His eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. Next to the portrait was the old ledger I had seen previously. I carefully picked up the ledger and began flipping through the pages. The entries were detailed and meticulous, but towards the end, they became erratic. The last few pages were filled with desperate notes and cryptic references. One entry read, "The presence is restless. We must find a way to appease it or suffer the consequences." As I read, the room grew colder, and a low, guttural growl reverberated through the store. Shadows seemed to twist and writhe in the dim light of my flashlight. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, there was nothing there. The whispers I had heard before grew louder, more insistent. "Help us. Release us," the whispers seemed to say, coming from every direction. Panic surged through me. I needed to escape. I dropped the ledger and ran towards the exit, the air around me growing colder and thicker with each step. The fog that had appeared before enveloped me, making it difficult to see. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, pleading and desperate. As I burst through the front door and into the cool night air, I looked back at the store. The windows were dark, and the store was eerily silent. The whispers faded, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I felt a mix of relief and dread. The next day, I went back to the store, hoping it would be as it had been before, but the atmosphere had changed. The shelves were neatly organized, and the cold spots were gone. The store seemed lighter, but there was an underlying tension. I spoke to Greg Thompson, the store's current owner, and shared my findings and experiences. Greg was initially skeptical but was visibly disturbed when I mentioned the details of Blackwood's dark practices. "I had no idea about all this," Greg said, his voice trembling. "We've had odd things happen from time to time, but I never connected it to anything serious. We decided to take action. Greg and I contacted experts in local folklore and spiritual practices. We organized a cleansing ritual to rid the store of any lingering malevolent forces. The preparation was meticulous. We gathered special herbs, performed protective rites, and recited ancient incantations. The night of the ritual, the store was shrouded in fog, and the temperature plummeted. Shadows danced ominously, and the air was thick with an almost palpable energy. The ritual was intense, with flickering lights and deep, resonant growls filling the store. As we completed the final incantations, the atmosphere began to change. The fog lifted, the oppressive cold dissipated, and a profound silence settled over the store. Exhausted but hopeful, we finished the ritual and left. In the weeks that followed, the store returned to a semblance of normalcy. The odd occurrences ceased, and customers shopped without experiencing the unsettling disturbances that had plagued the store. The once ominous atmosphere seemed to have lifted, and the store regained its old charm. I still visit the store occasionally, and while it no longer feels haunted, I can't shake the memories of the terrifying experiences. The store's dark past serves as a reminder of the shadows that can linger in unexpected places. Every so often, when the store is quiet and still, I wonder if the entities are still there, watching and waiting for their next opportunity to make themselves known.